For those of you who don't know, this is Hovind.
And I tell people right up front that I believe the Bible is the infallible, inspired, inerrant word of the living God. I believe it from cover to cover. I even believe the cover on mine. It says Kent Hovind.
I talked about him in the last episode too. You don't have to watch that episode to understand this one. They stand independently of each other. But if you're curious about his early life and how he got into the business of lying for a living, then give that one a watch. Click the card in the corner or the link in the description. This episode, I wanted to expand on his life, give a clearer picture of who he is and what he believes, and go through some of his seminar series. Let's get into it. Last episode, I talked about his family and how he got his start. All the way back in 1998, he filmed these seminar series, which eventually aired on national TV, with his son Eric in the opening scene.
Have you ever thought about it? I mean, really, what is the purpose to life? Why are we here? Where did we come from? For that matter, where are we going to go when this life is over? In this seminar, it talks about the age of the earth. Dr. Hovind gives solid evidence to show that this earth is not billions of years old. In fact, the evidence points towards a literal six-day creation, like told about in Genesis chapter 1. Hi, my name is Eric, and we hope you enjoy this incredibly powerful seminar presented by Dr. Hovind. It's called The Age of the Earth.
For the record, Kent Hovind does not give solid evidence of anything in these seminar series. He did a bunch of them, like 7, and they're all about 2 hours each. They performed really well. In fact, they made him millions. Well, as it turns out, he fancies himself something of a tax protester, and that landed him in hot water in 2007, about 2 years after these aired on national TV. The IRS came after him for all kinds of legal violations, and they put him in prison from 2007 to 2015. 8 years! Jesus Christ! His son Eric continued in his stead and kind of built his own ministry while his dad was away. He did a TV miniseries in 2010 called Evidence of God with Eric Hovind. He used all his dad's talking points. When Kent got out of prison, he actually tried to start up his tour again, and he used all the same talking points in the new talks as he did in the Creation Seminar series. They pretty much haven't changed since he created them in the 90s. And funny enough, Eric Hovind uses the exact same talking points as his dad, word for word. Same exact jokes, told with the same exact words, with the same exact inflections as his dad in the 90s. So needless to say, old Eric doesn't have much original material. But still, between Eric and Kent, who now has a YouTube channel with hundreds of thousands of subscribers, there was a lot of material for me to sift through. A lot. But I did it. I watched every single seminar episode and then some. I sat there while I worked and listened to their talking points for a week straight, looking for cohesion. Surprisingly, as it turns out, when you aren't worried about telling the truth or making sure your math lines up, it's fairly easy to fabricate a storyline that blends together well. Now, we're going to take a look at the seminar series, but before we do, I want to talk about propaganda so you can pick it out easier. Kent Hovind is famous for doing something called fire hose propaganda, and the Gish Gallop. Propaganda and logical fallacies are closely linked, and fallacies are usually the basis of propaganda, but they don't have to be. So for example, you've got an appeal to emotion logical fallacy, and you've got an appeal to emotion propaganda technique. You've got the ad hominem fallacy and the ad hominem propaganda technique. Fallacies are flaws in logical arguments, and propaganda is a method of twisting information around to give the listener a specific view of a situation. The term originally came from an administrative body in the Catholic Church, created in 1622. It was created to propagate the faith to non-believers. And, of course, they manipulated, lied, and did anything they could to convince people to join, including but not limited to killing people, if you remember the Crusades. Jehovah's Witnesses call the technique theocratic warfare. Most groups use these methods in some form. Here's Kent Hovind showing that the manipulative tactics are still alive and well, 400 years after the administrative body was created by the Catholic Church. Let's watch the first clip.
And for those that don't know, the Bible is your basic instructions before leaving Earth. You really ought to read the book because you're going to be gone for an awfully long time. I mean, when you leave here, there ain't no coming back, so make sure you're going to the right spot.
Obviously, this is a fear tactic. He's trying to make people care about what he has to say out of fear. Most Americans are taught to fear the pits of hell and try to avoid them at any cost. When you deal with cults on a regular basis like I do, you'll find they have similar manipulative patterns. The BITE model, written by Stephen Hassan, is basically a big list of propaganda and manipulation techniques used by cults to control people. They fall into 4 categories: behavior, information, thought, and emotion. emotion control. If you control the information they're allowed to take in by telling them not to watch worldly TV shows or read books that might be critical of the religion, but you don't control people emotionally by doing things like instilling the fear of hell in them, or in some cases, like Jehovah's Witnesses, prevent them from reaching out to non-Jehovah's Witness family members, you risk losing that control. You have to control them in these 4 ways or they'll slip from your fingers. In that clip, we see a perfect example of Kent Hovind taking advantage of the common control tactic that he knows basically every Christian has already been subjected to, the fear of hell. In fact, that isn't the only time he uses fear to control people. He's actually famous for something called the dentist story. It was a hard clip to find. I had to pull it off YouTube, so excuse the poor quality and the occasional blurs. Before we continue, I want to mention something. If you like what I do and you want to see me continue to do it, you can support me in a few ways. First, there's Patreon. That's probably the best way. But if you want to get something back for your support, you can check out my Teespring or my Etsy shop. Links are in the description. But you can also come to Faithless Forum from November 19th to 21st to meet me in person. We're planning to have herd immunity from COVID for the conference, so it'll be as safe as we can possibly make it. If you want to come, check out the website for links to hotel room blocks and tickets. faithlessforum.com. Anyways, let's watch Kent Hovind's famous dentist story. Again, sorry about the clip quality. Check this out. Kent is talking about the time he took his son Eric to the dentist.
Son was 7 years old. We went to the dentist.
And Eric was too scared of the needles to get his cavity filled.
Well, he tried to sit still. But when the dentist pulled out that 12-foot needle and poured in 10 gallons of lidocaine, he freaked out, lost control. And finally, the dentist was getting all nervous. He said, man, I can't do this. He's got to hold still. I said, Doc, let me take him outside and talk to him for a few minutes. Maybe I can calm him down. And boy, did I give him a spanking. It was a doozy. A few minutes later, the smoke is rising off his hind end, and the tears are coming down his cheeks, and the pearls are coming out of his nostrils. I mean, the whole thing. I said, now listen, son, we're going to go back in the dentist office, and you're going to sit in that chair. And if you wiggle one time, I'm not going to yell at you. I'm just calmly going to take you back out to the van and give you 2 spankings like you just got. That kid sat in the chair, opened his mouth, grabbed the handles, and didn't move a muscle. He was still scared of the dentist. That had not changed. But something had changed. Now, he was more scared of me. Great psychological difference. He's more scared of me than anything in the world. That's the way I wanted it.
Obviously, whoever clipped this out also added music, and that's kind of annoying, but what can you do? The point is, the guy's been using fear as a tool since day one. He knew it worked with his kids, and that's the way he wanted it.
That's the way I wanted it.
But using fear as a control technique is wrong. It's what cults do to control people. When groups do that, it's called using undue influence, a term used in courtrooms and psychology circles all the time. It means influence by which a person is induced to act otherwise than by their own free will or without adequate attention to the consequences. I hear you saying parents are supposed to influence and control their kids to grow up to be productive members of society. And you're right, but first of all, that influence shouldn't be destructive in nature. You shouldn't use fear to control people, especially not your kids. And second, the goal of that influence should be constructive. Stephen Hassan, the guy who wrote the BITE model, the model I mentioned earlier, also wrote something called the influence continuum. Any influence you use on anybody, especially your kids, should encourage creativity and humor. It should encourage critical thinking and free will. It shouldn't be based on fear and guilt. It shouldn't be used to encourage dependency and obedience. They should be learning to function on their own. You should give them unconditional love, not performance-based love. Anyways, those are just some of the problems with Kent Hovind's approach. And you can clearly see he applies it to other situations, like turning normal Christians into extremists. Let's continue watching his seminar series.
One of my jobs as a Christian is to be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh the reason of the hope that's in us. I think in the last few hundred years, the Christians have not done a good job of answering this evolution theory, and we've allowed this philosophy of evolution, actually it's a religion, we've allowed this religion to take over our school system, our legal system. Our whole thinking process now is based on a philosophy which has zero scientific evidence. None.
That's inaccurate. There's a mountain of evidence for evolution, and he knows that. He has to. He's been in like 1 billion debates. He's had this explained to him by like a ton of people. He can't possibly not know how evolution works at this point in his career, but it doesn't matter to him. What he's doing here is called reframing propaganda. He wants to frame evolution as a religion. It's a common propaganda technique. Politicians do it sometimes too, although it's commonly done by televangelists. Alex Jones does it about trans people. He wants you to think they're in a religion.
Well, you know, statistically, those couples then do the transgender deal. It's like a ritual. I don't know if those group, and they go after their testicles. I mean, it's like a religion to target boys with this whole transgenderism. They admit it's a transhumanist move.
And there are two reasons for that. First, he wants you to think you're a heretic if you quote-unquote believe in, support, or even don't vocally oppose this supposed religion. Second, he thinks it's a short hop from a religion to a cult, and he also thinks that being a religion is a prerequisite to being a cult. Both of those premises are incorrect. There are a ton of cults out there that have no ties to religion at all. Religion is commonly used as a weapon within cults to encourage people to be more devout and willing to do anything they're told, but it doesn't even have to have a religious component to it to be a cult. For example, Scientology isn't really a religion, it's a psychology cult. The only reason religion is bandied about at all is so they can keep their tax-exempt status. Heaven's Gate used religion against its members, but it was a UFO cult, not really a religion. NXIVM doesn't really have a religious component at all, not much of one anyways. The Jonestown cult was more of a communism cult than a religious cult, though it was more of a religious cult than some of the others. Anyways, the point is, hucksters have been trying to paint groups and movements they don't like as cults since the beginning, and they think if they can convince you it's a religion, it's one short logical jump to extremist movement, aka a cult. Let's keep listening to the seminar.
Okay, this is not my wife. That's just a picture of her. Last summer was our 31st anniversary, and we sat down and figured out how much money we have spent since we got married. We have spent all of it. We live in Pensacola, Florida. What's left of it, Hurricane Ivan about blew it off the map. But we're having a good time rebuilding down there. I have 3 children, 1 of each, and I got them all married off, and the dog died. So I made it. Praise God, I am home free. It is wonderful. And for those that don't know, we now have the whole family working in our ministry there, and have 4 grandkids so far. And for those that don't understand this, grandkids are God's reward for not killing your own kids when you thought about it. And all of them live right around me, and they all work in our ministry. They all want to serve God with their life. That's worth something to somebody.
He's very charming, all part of the act. People in his personal life say he has a terrible temper.
Say that again.
Your invitation's been revoked, okay? For reasons why. Talk to Ernie if you have any questions. Ernie or Bill Sardi.
See how nice you are once it's recording.
Yeah, well, I'm nice all the time, Jeff. Anyway.
You weren't a second ago.
Yeah, I was. I said, well, okay.
And he actually got charged and sentenced for Assault 3 not too long ago. He was sentenced to 30 days in jail and a year on probation, so don't let the charming, funny act deceive you. It makes people more willing to listen and accept what he has to say because they trust him. Let's keep watching.
We want to change people's worldview. There are 2 ways to look at this world. That's called your worldview. How do you view this world? Some people look at the world one way, and some look at another way. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the way you view the world determines how you will answer the 4 great questions of life.
Another example of reframing propaganda. Like he said a minute ago, he's not sneaking up from behind. He's out in the open about what he wants to do. He wants to turn you into a religious zealot at any cost, even if that means propagandizing, lying, and using undue influence. Of course, if he told his listeners that that's what he'd been doing, they wouldn't trust him anymore. So he isn't being completely forthcoming about what he's doing. Let's keep listening.
There are 4 fundamental questions that every single religion on planet Earth tries to answer. Who am I? Where did I come from? Why am I here? And where am I going when I die? The way you answer those questions is totally determined by your worldview. Some people look at the world and say, you know, it's amazing. A Big Bang made this from nothing. That's the humanist worldview based on the evolution theory.
4 questions. Who am I? Where did I come from? Why am I here? And where am I going when I die? Science doesn't try to answer any of those. All science does is try to understand the world around us. Nothing more. If understanding the world around us gives us insight into our origins as a species, so be it. Science has never tried to answer, what am I worth? Whatever that even means. It's kind of an ephemeral question. Science couldn't even begin to answer, where am I going when I die? Or why am I here? Science only tells us what is. It tells us facts about the world. We can look around and see round cuts on leaves. You could sit here and think to yourself, God put those cuts in the leaves as a sign that he's here with us. Or you can look for an explanation for where those round cuts came from. After the most basic preliminary investigation, you'd find the cuts weren't put there by God. They were made by caterpillars. Just because he wants it to be God doesn't mean it is. There's an explanation for everything we see around us. We might not know what it is yet, but there there is an explanation. Attributing anything to God is a bad idea. At best, you could say, God used these physical processes to make this thing happen. God created life by creating the process of evolution. And that's fine. I have no problem with that. But we have hard evidence for evolution. We can sit here and watch it unfold right in front of us. Evolution is a fact, and it's a theory. It's both. In the scientific community, facts are gathered together, and scientists take those facts and hypothesize about what they could mean. What could be causing them? You take these hypotheses and put them to the test. You try to falsify them, prove them wrong. After a hypothesis has been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, it becomes a theory, which is an overarching framework that describes a thing or a process. Like the theory of relativity. It isn't in question. We understand how it works. Or the germ theory of disease. Yes, germs are a theory, but they're also a fact. We know beyond a shadow of a doubt that microorganisms exist and they can make people sick. The theory of evolution is just as solid as the theory of relativity or the germ theory of disease. Oh, and one more thing. Kent wants to make it out like science is the belief that man is God and answers to no one, based on this graphic. He'd argue that he was talking about humanists. This is a thinly veiled attack on science. He can fool the crowd in front of him. Not me. If he likes science, then he'll look at the evidence and accept the inevitable conclusions from the stuff he doesn't want to hear as much as he does about the stuff he does want to hear. Let's continue.
Other people look at the world and say, you know, there's incredible design. There must be a designer. That's the creationist worldview based on creation. And those two worldviews are at war with each other. I mean, somebody is wrong. And I enjoy showing them who they are.
Honestly, I don't care if you want to be religious. I'm not at war with religious people. In fact, I want to work with religious people to stamp out extremism. We can't do it without their help. But religion belongs in the religion category, and science belongs in the science category. Don't try to answer questions like, how old is the Earth? Or did dinosaurs live with cavemen? And I won't try to answer whether or not you get to go to heaven. Kent Hovind wants there to be a war between the two. He wants you to get the impression that either you accept science or you accept the Bible. There doesn't have to be a conflict. But like I said, as a religious person, you shouldn't try to explain things with God. It will only end badly. It's called the God of the Gaps fallacy. It's likely that science will eventually come up with an explanation for how this thing happened, if it hasn't already, and then you're left standing there looking like a fool. Just like preachers who set dates for when Armageddon is going to take place. Don't do it. It's a bad idea. Kent Hovind is a master manipulator. As I said earlier, he makes claims in 15 seconds, and it takes 5 minutes to debunk them. That's his whole bit. It's called the Gish Gallop. Spread as much misinformation out as you can, so it's nearly impossible to counter it all. 20 hours worth of seminars will take 500 hours to completely debunk. As I said last episode, Aronrod does a great job of addressing his scientific claims, but most people don't take a close look at his propaganda techniques. Hopefully this gives some insight into his mindset and how he works. Anyways, that's all I've got for you. Thanks for watching, guys.